Here you are, already putting out 2021 top prospects and watch list players. When do you sleep, and more importantly, when do you start working on the next year?
Yeah, typical draft guy. I'm like those political reporters. One election ends, they're already talking about the next one, But it was certainly a story that my editors were interested in having. And I compiled a list a little bit throughout the season. I mean, I probably had to do half of that kind of after the draft or whatever. But, the obvious names like, Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence, we know them. We know Travis Etienne and all the running backs who went back to school. But as I go throughout the season, I'll make a note of somebody and say, wow, this guy played well against a 2020 prospect I'm watching, and I'll kind of put them in a separate file and just sort of compile names. Like, I got to do a deeper dive on this guy. Other names come up in conversations with personnel folks, like, wait till you see this kid next year. He's great, blah, blah, blah. And here we are. So I just sort of funneled a lot of those names in there. But the top 25, I at least wanted to pare down and give folks a little bit of a snapshot if we get a college football season of what they might be looking at.
Did you have like 10 minutes, 15 minutes to kind of take a deep breath after the 2020 draft ends and say, oh, it all happened, we did it, and now, or is it just like, all right, the final pick, Mr. Irrelevant's made, 2021, let's get those prospects out?
It's funny you say that. Actually, a quick personal story. I was finishing up my grades on Sunday morning. I had written all night Saturday and got through like 6 of the 8 divisions. And I was about 25 words away from finishing. And my wife came running in the house yelling. She'd accidentally snapped a branch she was cutting and hit herself in the eye. So I
oh, no.
God, right about when I was about ready to relax, she has this sort of horrible accident. And we had to take her to the ER. And of course, ER visits during a pandemic aren't the easiest thing.
Yes.
She's okay now.
Okay.
She's got a shiner, but yeah, it was like one of those, well, I'll probably sleep when I'm dead, I guess.
This was a different draft, right? This is probably a draft we'll never see happen again, obviously, because of the pandemic. Coaches and players were all quarantined, and it was all virtual. Do you think this process, because basically it forced coaches and GMs and teams to basically rely on the film more than anything else, more than meetings, more than a pro day, more than the scouting combine, do you think this process helped coaches and teams basically not overthink some of these picks, not get enamored with the guy because he ran fast at a pro day or threw well at the combine? Do you think it basically simplified it and helped teams not overthink these picks?
I think there's something to that. I think it also helps them kind of rethink their process a little bit and they were forced to make some tough calls on how to get people to be effective, right? And it involved obviously a little more tape work, some phone calls to get background information, finding out verified heights and weights. Some cases you couldn't do that. Any of those workouts that the kids put on videos. So again, I'm not trying to knock them. I understand they're trying to do whatever they can. They probably didn't amount to very much, but I do think there will be some conversations, and I believe that some of those have already happened amongst GMs, so college scouting directors, the rest of the staff, trying to decide, what did we learn from this? What can we get rid of that we were doing before that amounted to busy work or unnecessary labor or bad allocation of resources? I really do think there's going to be an effect from that. You already saw some teams not sending people to the Senior Bowl, going to the Combine for a day or two, kind of cutting back on some of that travel before the virus really kind of kicked in. So I think people have already had those conversations about what the effect might be. And it could involve a little less travel, a little more time at home, and just sort of a different approach because of what was thrown at them this year.
You put out your draft grades for every single team. So I'm curious, well, let's go to the negative first. Obviously, the Packers, I think, are the easy team to kind of peg for their draft being maybe the worst. Is there a team that had a pretty bad draft in your mind, or is it the Packers really the one that stands out the most?
I gave them that poor a grade now because Jordan Love is no sure thing. In 4 years, we could look back and say, what a masterstroke this was. What a brilliant pick it was. A.J. Dillon could be a fantastic power back to complement Aaron Jones. Joseph DeGuara could be the next Kyle Juszczyk. I mean, we could look back at this prop that they had and say it was pretty good. I think the immediate reaction is, boy, it's a 13-3 team coming off an NFC title game. Did they not think more short-term and less long-term? And I kind of applaud them for it. I mean, I know I gave them a low grade, but the grade reflects the unknown of Love. Another team that they actually made some good picks, but it's the allocation of resources with their draft capital, and that's the Houston Texans. I liked some of the choices they made. I really did. Every year, they seem to kind of surprise me with how effective they can be with fewer picks. But just because you're thrifty, just because you're smart with how you use the limited choices you have, I like Ross Blacklock and Jonathan Grenard. I think is going to be good. John Reed, they got in fourth round. Isaiah Coulter. I mean, they had some pretty good picks. But when you're trading away DeAndre Hopkins at about 45 cents on the dollar, in my opinion, I can't give you a solid grade. And that does factor in. Hopkins going to Arizona for a second rounder, I am absolutely including that in their draft grade. Because
I loved what the Cardinals did, to be honest. I like the Isaiah Simmons pick. And Josh Jones, I'm curious. He's a guy that you read mock drafts, you read his profile. I mean, he's a fringe first-round guy, I would say, right? Maybe end of the first, early second. Is there a reason why you think he dropped to the third? And did you like the Cardinals draft?
I never personally viewed him as a first-round prospect, although you're right. There were people putting him in as high as number 18 to the Miami Dolphins, and I just thought that was wild because I don't know that he has a massive upside. I really don't think he's ever going to be a superior tackle in this league, but he does have 4 years of starting experience at Houston. Didn't go up against a banner list of pass rushers, but for the most part played pretty well. Pretty solid week at the Senior Bowl. I think I had him as my 42nd overall player, 41st, something like that. So the first round talk, the top 20 talk was absurd to me. The second round felt like his best landing spot from just a value standpoint. Third round, however, now we're talking about a bargain. Those are the kind of investments that when you look back, you say to yourself, yeah, that's a smart play right there. They may not have anything special, but he played at Houston with a quarterback in De'Ara King who, style-wise, scrambling around and making throws and running and whatever, improvising, very similar to Kyler Murray. So I can understand how that translation would be pretty seamless, even in an offseason where we may not have pads on until training camp or something.
Another team that made an interesting quarterback decision in the second round, Eagles took Jalen Hurts. The talk of that pick is that the Eagles are trying to use him and basically have him be a Taysom Hill, a do-it-all role, catch the ball, run the ball, throw the ball. Watching his tape at Oklahoma and Alabama, he's obviously athletic, but does he have the skill set to be a sort of a Taysom Hill, do-it-all kind of role where he can line up all over the field, catch the ball, run the ball, throw the ball? Does he have that kind of skill set to fit that role?
Yeah, I think he does. I mean, he played a little receiver at Alabama, when Tua was starting. Not a lot. I mean, I think he probably played about 24 snaps over a year or two or something like that. So they would move him around a tiny bit. We just didn't see much of it. I think he caught a couple passes against Missouri in 2018 before leaving. So he's built like a running back, in my opinion. And he's a very good, tough, and fluid runner. If he had no ability to throw the ball, we'd be talking about Jalen Hurts as a running back prospect in the NFL. But he's taken strides as a passer. We know that. I think he's still a project of some sort, but say that he has nothing to offer right away is some people have said that, and I thought, he's a good football player. And I understand it from a value perspective, too, in the sense you want to protect your best assets. 10 months ago, they made Carson Wentz this ginormous contract and everything, and he's been hurt. I mean, he's had injuries. And you have to have a great insurance plan as your number two. So was it a little bit rich for their immediate needs? Sure. You don't take gadget guys in the round two. So that tells me that he has more value to them than just as this change-up kind of weapon. So, yes, I think he'll be factored into that role. But I also believe they view it as if Carson goes down, our season was over before the draft. Now it may not be.
Eric, I'm curious because I was listening to your colleagues, Charles Robinson and Terez Paylor, do their podcast, and Charles brought up an interesting point when it comes to Jalen Hurts and his thinking. He was saying that maybe the Eagles are forward-thinking, that they see what Taysom Hill is doing with the Saints, and they want to take that to the next level. He was saying maybe in 5 years and 10 years, we could see what he called it a half quarterback become pretty popular in the NFL. College quarterback who can run, pass, and catch, put him on the field in any position, and defenses have to adjust and don't know what he could do. Is that a skill set or a possible role that we could see be filled more often going forward, do you think?
It's possible, right? I mean, it's got to be the right situation. If every team were to set out and try to do that, we wouldn't have enough talented players to fill those types of roles. I mean, look, would it possibly get an athletic quarterback from maybe a non-Power 5 school who is a little bit on the short side, maybe doesn't have a glitzy arm, but he's got a pretty good arm, somebody on that second or third tier of NFL prospects, or fourth or fifth tier, whatever you want to say? Could it get them an opportunity and give them sort of a different look? Yes. It would maybe allow you to have a little more roster flexibility. Maybe you can use these guys on special teams like Hill does. Maybe there's another role for them where you can free up a little roster space with somebody who wears 3 or 4 hats. So it's possible. Absolutely. Especially with the way the college game has evolved over the last 15, 20 years, where those types of athletes are flourishing and being, sort of showcased. So I could see it. I just don't know that we're ever going to have that point where the vast majority of teams are going to be committing to that. it's going to take some real success for that role. Like Taysom Hill's great, but he's never thrown for a touchdown pass. There's still a limit to what he can do, in my opinion, or at least that we've seen thus far.
Another quarterback, that I was a lot higher on him than probably everyone else was for good reason, and that was Jake Fromm. I liked the way he played at Georgia. I thought, especially this last year, it was more the offense and the receivers than his fault for the regression. And I looked, too, he chased Jacob Eason out of Georgia. He caused Justin Fields to transfer, both those guys, and Jacob Eason that was drafted ahead of him. And Justin Fields you have high on your big board and can go early next year. Are you surprised at all they dropped all the way to the 5th round, though?
Yeah, I am. And obviously to go to the Buffalo Bills, where he's a clear number 2 and really won't elevate past that point, barring Josh Allen getting hurt. Now, of course, Josh Allen, a tough running quarterback who took some vicious hits last year. Again, similar to what we were talking about with Wentz, it's a nice little insurance plan. I don't think the Bills went into this draft thinking we're taking a quarterback. I think they saw the value and said, this guy's too good to be here. And you're right about it. I mean, look, as good as that offensive line for Georgia was, I felt like the scheme from James Coley came under fire for good reason. There was a lot of kind of isolation stuff that really wasn't working. The receivers, you pointed out, weren't separating, were dropping passes. There were some route mix-ups. And really, Fromm had a 5-game stretch that really put him down in the dumpster. It was 5 straight games under 50% passing. That's not the Jake Fromm that I watched earlier in his career. I mean, he wasn't a precise marksman, but he was somebody who usually put the ball in a pretty good spot. So, yeah, I think it was kind of wearing on him a little bit, and they were asking their receivers to do stuff that they probably couldn't do. So, combination of those things, him coming out, really ended up kind of hurting his process a little bit. Saw him at the combine. It was almost like he was trying to dispel the myth of him having a weak arm. He was gunning every single pass, 7-yard slant. He was throwing like he was trying to put it through a brick wall. And it was, guess what? He was scattershot, so that hurt him too, I think. And it was just a tough offseason for him the way it worked out.
Eric, so I'm curious. Obviously, I think the Ravens and the Cowboys consensually 2 of the best drafts this past year. Is there another team that you really, really liked a lot and what the overall draft that they had?
Yeah, both those teams were great. I mean, if you want to pick somebody else, you could say Minnesota really got a nice haul as well. And, if you want to debate the wisdom of a 15-man draft class, I'm willing to engage in it just because, especially with the fact that they may not have that many roster spots open, even with some personnel losses this offseason. And next year, they're going to get at least 10 picks. They have some compensatory picks coming their way as well. So, they could have a dozen picks next year. They're going to package all those and move up. That's a discussion for down the road, I think. But I just look at who they got. And, Ezra Cleveland at 58 was a nice value. I like Jeff Gladney and Justin Jefferson. I just thought it was like B-plus pick after B-plus pick until you got to James Lynch. I thought Lynch is going to end up being one of the biggest steals at 130. He's not J.J. Watt, okay? Like, I've heard some people say that. Come on, he's not that good. But a really, really good player, a good foundational piece. And Kenny Willekes a couple rounds later, like those two guys, I understand the athletic benchmarks you want to see at certain spots. I understand that guys with shorter arms like those two have it a little tougher when they're trying to disengage. But, man, those are 2 good football players that they got. That deep in the draft, I thought their mining for talent was really well achieved. I like the approach. That's a good front office. Rick Spielman, George Payton. Good group of scouts up there, and I think they did the most with as many picks as they had.
Especially when you pick that many times, and the hit rate, even if it's 50%, you're still getting,
right.
7, 8 great players on your team that can contribute. It is a numbers game to a certain point as well. So, Eric, we'll finish up with this then. So, obviously, the draft's over. All these rookies are in their respective teams. Is there an early leaning or guy you like maybe that could win Rookie of the Year early on or have a nice breakout early start to his career?
Yeah, obviously it's a quarterback award, right? If the quarterback starts 14 or more games, they're going to have an excellent chance to be in the running as long as they're, not terrible and the only option a team has or something like that. And we saw Gardner Minshew start 12 games a year ago and play really, really well for stretches. So there's always the chance that somebody a little farther down the pecking order. But I would start with Burrow. Look, Andy Dalton gets released today, and that was the only question. Do they bring in Dalton as the sort of the first month of the season starter and then turn it over to Burrow? That question's been answered now today with this move. So obviously, if you start 16 games and AJ Green is signed and they have Tyler Boyd and they have John Ross, and they have Joe Mixon. I mean, look, there's some weapons there. Jonah Williams comes back. I still think going chalk here is the worst move in the world, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire landing in that offense, if he scores 13 touchdowns or something next year, 8 rushing, 5 receiving or whatever, it wouldn't shock me to see him kind of catch people, Jonathan Taylor too in Indy. There's a couple backs who have great opportunities.